Lugia. It is said to be the guardian of the sea, yet is not a water type. How fast can our psychic flying legendary beast beat Pokemon Crystal on our first attempt solo Pokemon challenge? Well, let's find out. Lugia, as previously noted, is a legendary Pokemon. So as you can see there in the bottom left hand part of the screen, Lugia has a high defense and high special defense stat. So it's going to be a tanky Pokemon. It does, however, have an issue. On the right hand side of the screen, you can see that its only move is Aeroblast, an extremely unique, high damage, high accuracy flying move. With one issue, it only has 5 PP, and it's the only move it starts out with. So this means we're going to have to visit the Pokemon Center quite often to make sure that we have enough PP. Then after a brief visit with Professor Elm to pick up our Pokemon and then talk to his aide, we head over to Mr. Pokemon's house, where he tells us just how good of a guy Professor Elm is, and then Professor Oak decides to interject himself into the conversation and tell us just how cool the Pokedex is, and he wants us to fill up the Pokedex just like we did in Gen 1. He decides that we need to rest up a bit, and then Professor Elm gives us a call that something has happened. We make our way back, but on the way back we then head into this fellow who just seems to be blocking our path. He then informs us that his name is Triple Question Mark and has a shiny Totodile, which we promptly take down with 2 Aeroblasts. We then make it back to Professor Elm's place, where the police officer then tells us that a Pokemon has been stolen. But don't worry, we found out that the name of the treacherous villain is Triple Question Mark. We let him know, and then Professor Elm informs us about the nearby gym and that we should take him on. The aide then hands us a few Pokeballs to make a start to our journey. Throughout this playthrough, I'm going to show you guys every new shiny encounter and keep a count there on the middle left hand side of the screen. So on the way to the gym, we managed to see shiny Rattata, shiny Pidgey, shiny Caterpie, shiny Bellsprout, shiny Hoothoot, shiny Spearow, before we then find ourselves at the Violet City gym. Falkner then leads off with his usual Pidgey, but it's no match for our first Aeroblast, which then takes us into Pidgeotto. Pidgeotto can't survive an Aeroblast either, which gets us the win, and the Mudslap TM, which we promptly teach immediately. So our journey then takes us to Azalea Town. But before we do that, we need to make sure that we get through Union Cave. On our way through Union Cave, we managed to see these shinies. Shiny Zubat, shiny Nidoran Male, shiny Geodude, shiny Coughing, and shiny Slowpoke. In Union Cave, we then pick up the Swift TM and teach it right away, so now we'll have some extra PP to work with. On our way out of Union Cave, we managed to encounter a shiny Vulpix and shiny Machop. Before we do anything in Azalea Town, we then head over to Ilex Forest, where we're going to be catching our HM Pokemon. And today's HM Pokemon are going to be Psyduck for Surf, Strength, Whirlpool, and Waterfall, and then an Oddish for Cut and Flash. With our HM Pokemon in hand, we then head over to this old man's house, where he tells us some things are definitely happening in Slowpokewell, and we need to take a look. We find out that Team Rocket is having some shenanigans here in Slowpokewell, and we need to take them down. While we're in Slowpokewell, we managed to take down a shiny Ekans. After teaching Rockets a lesson, Kurt then comes back and tells us that we've done a good job and that we can finish up all the rest of the deeds that we have in Azalea Town. But naturally, we go to the gym first, where we encounter a shiny Spinarak, shiny Ledaba, shiny Paris, shiny Weedle, shiny Kakuna, and shiny Beedrill, which then takes us to the leader of the Azalea Town gym, Bugsy. Bugsy sends out his patented Metapod, which is promptly taken down with an Aeroblast, which takes us into Scyther, which can't manage to stand an Aeroblast either, only managing a quick attack, followed by Kakuna, which also goes down to an Aeroblast, getting ourselves the Hive Badge. All that's left now is to head towards Goldenrod through the Ilex Forest, but unfortunately our rival seems to be blocking our path. Fortunately for us, we have our trusty Lugia at our disposal, and we can go ahead and take down Ghastly with a single Aeroblast. Wanting to conserve some PP, I then use a Swift on Zubat, but unfortunately it doesn't work and we have to use a second Swift, which takes us to Croconaw, where we get a rare miss, but the next Aeroblast takes it down after taking a Water Gun. After helping an old man in the Ilex Forest return to his Farfetch, we then get the HM for Cut, which allows us to get to the other side of the forest, where we meet this weary traveler that manages to hand us Headbutt. And then we go ahead and teach it immediately over Safeguard. Then on Route 34 on the way to Goldenrod City, we managed to see these shinies. Shiny Sandshrew, shiny Snubbull, shiny Hoppip, shiny Bulbasaur, shiny Mankey, shiny Diglett, shiny Growlithe, shiny Psyduck, shiny Grimer, and shiny Lickitung. Once in Goldenrod, first thing I do is head to the underground to make sure that I pick up the coin case and then get a haircut to ensure that my Lugia's return attack in the future is going to do maximum amount of damage, followed by continuing on in the underground to fight this shiny Magnemite and shiny Voltorb. Then I head over to the bike shop to pick up the bicycle, followed by heading over to the game corner where I then pick up some money and then buy myself an Abra to use teleport later on. Then to the radio station to pick up the radio card, then heading out of town up north to pick up Kenya from this guy, heading towards Sudowoodo, and then I learned Gust, which is a stab flying attack with a lot of extra PP I teach over Swift. And then continuing on through Route 35, I make sure to battle these shinies: shiny Magmar, shiny Abra, shiny Kadabra, shiny Tangela, shiny Venonat, and shiny Sentret. Then I come up to the flower shop worker guarding Sudowoodo, and she tells me about the squirt bottle. But before I can grab the squirt bottle, I need to get myself the plane badge. So I head over to the Goldenrod City Gym, where I confront Whitney. Whitney then sends out Clefairy, but just like all other Pokemon, Clefairy's no match for our Aeroblast, which then takes us to the much scarier Miltank. But our first Aeroblast misses and she can get a rollout chain started. Luckily, our next two Aeroblasts can manage to take down Miltank, which gets us the plane badge and access to the squirt bottle, but more importantly, gives us the right to go on Route 37, where we find these shinies: shiny Jigglypuff and shiny Drowsy. Then the Kimono Girl hut, where we find these shinies: shiny Flareon, shiny Espeon, shiny Umbreon, shiny Vaporeon, and shiny Jolteon. But in order to progress, we need to get ourselves to the Burn Tower and fight the rival once again. But just like any other trainer, his Haunter stands no chance to an Aeroblast. And then, once we move on to Magnemite, our weakened Mudslap still is able to take down Magnemite, no issue. Croconaw also does not withstand up to an Aeroblast. And then the last Pokemon, Zubat, of course, does not stand up to another Aeroblast. This then opening up our horizons as we're now able to go to the Ecruteak Gym and face Morty. But the Ghost Master is not going to be able to stand any sort of chance to us. We don't even bother healing and take down his Ghastly with an Aeroblast, followed by Haunter with another Aeroblast. And then his Ace Gengar with an Aeroblast, which takes us to level 29, and then take down Haunter with an Aeroblast, getting ourselves the Fog Badge, but more importantly, opening up the storyline for us to go west towards Olivine. And on the way, we saw these shinies: shiny Skiploom, shiny Corsola, shiny Pikachu, shiny Poliwhirl, shiny Raticate, and shiny Krabby. And once in Olivine, we are able to collect strength from this guy inside of the house, followed by heading over to the lighthouse where we see these shinies: shiny Noctowl, shiny Fearow, and shiny Marill, where we finally realize that with the Fog Badge comes the Shadow Ball TM. And so we teach over Mudslap and face the rest of these shinies: shiny Staryu and shiny Electrode. With all of the members of the lighthouse defeated and the news that I need to go over to Cianwood City to get some medicine for Jasmine's Ampharos, I then get the secret potion and then work my way to the Cianwood Gym, where I manage to fight all of these shinies: shiny Hitmonlee, shiny Hitmonchan, and shiny Machoke, where I then managed to level up and learn Recover over Gust, and then fight a shiny Primeape before then fighting the gym leader Chuck himself. But armed with one of the best flying moves in the entire game, with Stab, Chuck's not really going to stand much of any sort of challenge whatsoever as we take down Primeape with an Aeroblast, followed by Poliwrath with another Aeroblast, getting ourselves the Storm Badge, and allowing us to pick up the Fly HM from Chuck's wife, and then head back to Olivine to give Jasmine the secret potion. And now Jasmine will occupy her gym once again, and seeing how I've been one-shotting just about everything to this point of the game, I decide to give her a go. Magnemite is first, and I go ahead and start off with the Shadow Ball, my highest damage move. Unfortunately, it does not do very much damage, and she paralyzes me with a Thunder Wave, followed by then confusing me with a Supersonic. And now from here, I'm just going to be in bad shape, as there's no way I'm going to be able to beat the other Magnemite and Steelix from here, and a Thunderbolt then takes me out. On the next attempt, I go ahead and try again, this time with an Aeroblast. Unfortunately, Aeroblast does just a little bit less than half, but I managed to take it out after a few turns. But on the next Magnemite, it then goes back and uses Paralysis and Supersonic and puts me in a bad shape once again as I continue to hit myself and take more Thunderbolts as I get knocked out and don't even make it to Steelix. Since I can't even beat her easy Pokemon, I decide to move on and go over to Mahogany Town, where I managed to see these shinies on my way to Lake of Rage. Shiny Nidorina and Shiny Nidorino, followed by the guaranteed Shiny Gyarados, where you can't escape the battle. But I decided to take it down with 2 Aeroblast as it only manages a Dragon Rage. After taking down Shiny Gyarados, I managed to talk to Lance, who tells me things are going on that are just a little bit fishy, and I should meet him back in Mahogany Town. After entering this house, I then see Dragonite almost murder a dude, and I followed Lance downstairs, where Team Rocket is up to no good, and I need to take down all the Rockets. So I battle all of the Rockets and face these shinies. Shiny Golbat, Shiny Gloom, Shiny Ditto, Shiny Arbok, and Shiny Murkrow, and then meet back up with Lance at the generator where we have to take on a bunch of electrodes. Once finished with the electrodes, I then meet back up with Lance where he gives me the HM for Whirlpool. And with all of that taken care of, I can then head over to the Mahogany Gym where I managed to fight these shinies, Shiny Shelder and Shiny Cloyster, where I can then figure out the puzzle very quickly and then make it over to Pryce. Pryce, unfortunately, is just not a good gym leader, so his seal doesn't even take one single hit before we move on to Dugong, which also does not take a single hit. And then for Piloswine, we go ahead and use an Aeroblast. Luckily for him, it does survive. But, unfortunately for him, it's still not going to do him any good as Piloswine doesn't have any good attacks, and it doesn't take us long to get the win. Now, unfortunately for us, there is literally nowhere else to go but to fight Jasmine. So we make our way over to Olivine City, prep ourselves with a Paralyzed Cure Berry, and then fingers crossed. Hopefully all of the extra levels will help us significantly more in this Jasmine battle. It's clear from our first Shadow Ball that we're already doing half damage, which is significant improvement over the last time we played against Jasmine. So after our first Thunder Wave and getting Paralyzed Cure Bearer, we finally make it to Steelix for the first time and just see how much damage we're going to do. Unfortunately, a critical hit Aeroblast still does not do very much damage. Luckily, we have a pretty darn high defense and we have Recover, so there really is no way for us to get knocked out other than us getting crit. Since she doesn't have a move like Harden to increase our defense, this will eventually go our way. We have enough PP to hopefully get ourselves a win, and it looks like we do after enough time. And then, after we get ourselves the Iron Tail TM, we make sure to walk outside of the gym where Professor Elm gives us a call to head back to Goldenrod City, as there's some things going on with the radio tower that he just can't understand. During the Rocket plotline, we managed to run into these shinies, Shiny Muck, Shiny Porygon, and Shiny Weezing. The Weezing happened to be from the director, who told us to go to the basement, where we face our rival once again. This battle's gonna look a little weird, as we're trying to conserve PP because we still have a whole entire Rocket hideout to go, so we use Shadow Ball on Golbat. Luckily, it just takes 2 hits and we take it out. Magnemite, again, only Shadow Ball. This time, it's our actual best move to use. Then for Sneasel, I switch over to Aeroblast because Shadow Ball is severely weakened. Then for Feraligatr, I then use a Headbutt in order to save PP on Aeroblast. Unfortunately, Shadow Ball was not enough to do the difference, but Shadow Ball eventually got the job done, followed by Haunter, who is weak to a Shadow Ball, and we get ourselves a quick and easy victory. While in the Rocket basement, we eventually encounter all of these shinies. Shiny Vileplume, Shiny Houndour, Shiny Houndoom, Shiny Natu, and Shiny Rhyhorn. With all of the Rockets defeated, we can then make our way past Mahogany Town to the Ice Path, where we managed to pick up the TM for Waterfall. Before doing anything gym related in Blackthorn City, I make sure to head right back to Goldenrod City to pick up Return. It's going to end up being a very useful move for the remainder of the run. Then we make our way to the Blackthorn Gym, where we face these shinies, Shiny Dratini, Shiny Seadra, Shiny Horsey, and Shiny Dragonair, before then arriving to the Blackthorn City Gym Leader, Clair. Clair uses a lot of dragons. Now, I start out with my first return attack, which almost takes her out, but it leaves her enough time to use a Thunder Wave. Luckily, on the next Dragonair, a single Aeroblast is just enough to take it out, followed by the next Dragonair, where Aeroblast then decides that it wants to get fully paralyzed, followed by the next attack, which also becomes fully paralyzed. But luckily, the third one is a hit, which takes us to Kingdra. I guess I really just should have followed my instincts, because Aeroblast is a one-shot on Kingdra as well. Then this brings us to the part of the game I'm not entirely familiar with. Now, of course, the Dragon's Den you did have to go to in Silver version, which is what I played as a kid. However, it appears that in Crystal version here, you end up having to do this quiz, which results in you getting a Dratini, which is a pretty cool difference, I might add. Anyways, Clair eventually gives us the badge and the Dragon Breath TM, and we make our way to Professor Elm. Professor Elm then gives us the Master Ball and allows us to go on our way towards Kanto. On our way to Kanto, we managed to see these shinies. Shiny Ivysaur, Shiny Venusaur, Shiny Starmie, Shiny Nidoqueen, Shiny Blastoise, Shiny Parasect, Shiny Golduck, and Shiny Rapidash, where we finally make our way to the exit of the cave. But who do we find here? Oh, it's the rival! People typically shrug this rival off to the side, as it's usually not very high leveled and his Pokemon just aren't all that great, as case that we took out his Sneasel in one hit. However, Magneton then starts out with a Thunder Wave, which is pretty good strategy on his end. We don't have a good move for a Steel type. As we then begin to move on to Golbat, you start to see where this strategy is starting to come in place. He hits us with a Confuse Ray, which obviously confuses. We move on to Haunter, but here's where the kicker happens. We're slower than Haunter, and it hits us with Curse. But now that we're paralyzed, we're taking curse damage every now and again, and then we eventually move on to Kadabra, where it obviously outspeeds and is going to take us out with either curse or a move from Kadabra. On the next attempt, however, we get to take down Kadabra thanks to a Shadow Ball. But then when we move on to Feraligatr, we can't really one-shot it with an Aeroblast, so it's going to be able to take us down with a curse, followed by a Feraligatr then being able to outspeed with a Slash. But on the next attempt, things finally decide to go our way as Magneton only uses a Thunder Shock and we manage a critical hit return. So the Feraligatr this time is not going to be much of an issue whatsoever, and we get through the final rival battle. But just about anybody can get to the Elite Four with a Lugia on the backs of just Aeroblast because it's such a darn strong move, and because Johto has just got so many low-level trainers. The real test is going to be how well are we going to do against the Elite Four, because there's actual strategy involved here. And because there's a pretty big level jump from that final rival battle in the Elite Four. However, I do think the Elite Four is really going to start on the second trainer because Will is just going to be real easy thanks to Shadow Ball. Every single one of his Pokemon are Psychic type, therefore Shadow Ball is going to do a tremendous amount of damage, and with a pretty decent special attack stat, it's really going to be difficult for him to be able to make up any ground on us. The Slowbro will probably be one of the bigger threats, but unfortunately it just goes with an Amnesia. Then for Exeggutor, we can take it down with either a Shadow Ball or an Aeroblast. I then used Shadow Ball because I wasn't thinking straight. Boga, on the other hand, is not going to be just easy battles because he's got strategy. It's not a good strategy, it's evasion, but it'll do. Typically, in Gen 1, I just know the game inside and out, so I know all of my moves, I know all of the matchups. However, things get a little bit different when it comes to Johto, because I just don't know all of the Pokemon. Therefore, I didn't know Ariados was a bug type immediately. Therefore, I went with the tried and true return attack. There's also another factor. I don't know where all the elixirs and ethers are. So I actually have a limited amount of PP to go through the Elite Four with. Anyways, we've made it to Venomoth with extremely good luck. We take it down with the return attack, move on to Muck, and then the next return attack does just a little bit more than half as it uses acid armor and causing us to do 2 more attacks before getting the win, taking us to the new and improved Bruno, who then uses the new Hitmontop. Unfortunately for him, it's not going to be any sort of challenge for our Lugia because, well, quite frankly, it doesn't have a move that can do much damage to us. Pursuit is a very low damage dark move. Then for Onix, we have to use a move like Shadow Ball, which is fine because it's a move that has a lot of PP and it does a decent amount of damage, followed by the new and improved Hitmonchan that now has a lot more special defense than it did in Gen 1. And I use one of my very few Aeroblasts on Machamp because it's so tanky there in Gen 1, so I wanted to make sure it would go down. Followed by the one that has the lowest amount of defense, Hitmonlee, which doesn't even survive a return like the rest. Taking us to Karen, or better known as the rival 2 of Gen 2, as her Umbreon loves to use Sand Attack or Confuse Ray at the start of the battle. She then sends out her Umbreon, who's sporting a cool blue color, as we then use an Aeroblast, but it manages to survive and confuse us, which is the better of the options as the next return takes it down and takes us to Murkrow. But from here, things should be pretty easy since we don't have a Sand Attack on us because the rest of her team just isn't that frightening. We go ahead and use our returns, and even a Crunch Attack doesn't do a whole lot of damage. I didn't really anticipate the Max Potion, but it's not a big deal as another return takes it down, followed by Gengar, who we use one of our saved Shadow Balls for. And then it takes us to Vileplume, who I decide to save my Aeroblast and just use a return. Unfortunately, it does paralyze me, and it gets now the speed advantage, but it's not going to be a big deal as we are going to be able to do more damage than she's being able to heal. But it does take a massive amount of PP, which does bring us to a little bit of an issue going into Lance, so I make sure to use the rest of my PP options on return in Shadow Ball. Lance then starts off with a Gyarados that's famous for using Rain Dance, as Gen 2 wanted to promote weather condition moves, boosting Surf, but unfortunately it never gets a chance to use that Surf. And Dragonite is then able to tank a return attack followed by using a Thunder Wave that will guarantee the rest of this match ends up being very random. We're able to take down the Dragonite, but the second Dragonite is going to be a big problem thanks to Blizzard, and accuracy seems to be no problem for Dragonite. On the next attempt, we make it back to the second Dragonite with more HP, and we're able to 3-shot it as usual, taking us to Aerodactyl. Unfortunately, we don't have a good move to use on Aerodactyl, but Aerodactyl seems to be a flinch machine as it flinches us twice in a row, then taking us down. On the next attempt, Flinch then prevents our recover, taking us down. On the next attempt, I'm finally able to then use a recover, allowing me to get a little bit further in the battle. Unfortunately, I still struggle with getting hit by rock slides and flinching. Then I manage a Shadow Ball that ends up critting and leaving him at 4 HP as I then flinch and get taken out by another rock slide. On the next attempt, I get paralyzed too many times and Dragonite takes me down Blizzard. On the next attempt, Shadow Ball ends up getting fully paralyzed, followed by hitting twice in a row that ends up taking down Aerodactyl and finally getting me to Charizard. But Charizard then outspeeds and takes me down with a flamethrower, followed by the next attempt where Aerodactyl manages to flinch me twice in a row, again, and taking me out. On the next attempt, things finally come up Milhouse as I'm able to take down the Dragonite without getting fully paralyzed, which makes the rest of the battle easy, and I make it right back to Charizard. And this time, I'm going to be able to outspeed, so I only need to survive one flamethrower, which seems to be very easy, taking us to the final Dragonite. But this Dragonite's moveset is not very scary whatsoever, and it doesn't take us long to take it out and finally make us the champion of Johto, allowing us to finish the game at level 53 with 144 real time, 630 game time, and 12 resets. But unlike Gen 1, the Elite Four is not where this game ends. We have an entire region to still visit. So we reset the game and head back to Professor Elm, who gives us the SS ticket, which allows us to go to Olivine City and board the SS Aqua. And on this ship, there's a few new shinies to add to the list. Shiny Delibird, Shiny Teddiursa, and Shiny Phanpy. Now we have a few errands to run here on the ship. The first one is to find the missing granddaughter. But to do that, we need to find the Lazy Sailor. The Lazy Sailor is hidden in this room. Once you've battled him, you then get back to work, as the guard then allows you to pass where you can find the missing granddaughter in the captain's quarters, and you return her to safety, finally allowing you to leave the ship and arrive back into our glorious Kanto region. In Kanto, you can go about the gym system in just about any order you want. However, the gyms are going to be very easy, and therefore I'm going to mostly gloss over them quite quickly, but I will make sure to go over just about the entire storyline for this first video. From the moment you arrive in Vermilion City, you can then battle Surge, as you obviously already have Cut. However, Surge has a team of very fast Pokemon, and Electric is one of my weaknesses, so I can't really take this battle lightly. Luckily, Raichu's got some very weak defenses leading us into Magneton, which sets up a double team, as we then miss a few moves and get hit by a Zap Cannon that paralyzes. Luckily, we're able to get through the paralysis and deal the final blow to Magneton, and taking us to Electabuzz, which could probably easily knock us out, but thanks to a Thunder Mist, we're able to finally recover the majority of our HP back, as we exploit Electabuzz's very weak defenses, taking us to Electrode, and Electrode then also tries to use Stall Tactics. Luckily, it doesn't affect our first return, as the next Electrode also sets up Stall Tactics, and after 2 double teams, it feels like everything is all lost as we eventually finally land our final return for the win, followed by heading directly north to Saffron City as I managed to pick up Psychic, which Lugia hasn't learned naturally by now. And while in Saffron City, it's a perfect opportunity to then go ahead and face Sabrina on our way to Cerulean. Somehow, Sabrina has less Pokemon in this game, starting with an Espeon, which is easily taken down with a Shadow Ball. But for some reason, she decides to get rid of her Venomoth, as the next Pokemon is Mr. Mime. But with a 9-level lead, Mr. Mime can't stand a Shadow Ball, and nor can Alakazam, getting us the badge and further into the plotline. On our way to the power plant, where it normally houses Zapdos, we then face this Sandslash. It turns out the power plant has been a little bit upgraded since the Generation 1 days. The plant director finds out that one of the parts in his machine are now stolen, and him and the doorman need our help in order to get this machine part back. Our search then leads us to the Cerulean City gym, where we run into this Rocket who says there's nothing to see here. But we had got other plans, as we know the machine part is located in the middle section water. On our way to locate Misty, we run back into this Rocket, who after a battle then reveals that he's actually hidden the machine part in the Cerulean City gym. Keeping on our Nugget Bridge path to find Misty, we then run into these shinies. Shiny Oddish, Shiny Wigglytuff, Shiny Granbill, Shiny Bellossom, and Shiny Nidoking. Once finally arriving over to Bill's house, we meet Misty, and she calls us a pest, but then notices our badges, and then decides that we're good enough to battle her, so we should make our way towards the gym. In this game, Misty's team is actually quite balanced. In the anime, she never managed to get a Golduck, but apparently she must have evolved her Psyduck into a Golduck. Then apparently she must have loved Ash's Lapras so much that she decided that she wanted a Lapras of her own. Then, as if she had a real person behind her creation, Starmie has a great moveset with Surf, Ice Beam, Confuse Ray, and Recover, but still not enough to stop our Guardian from taking it down. And now we notice why she was talking about our badges, because she has a Quagsire and therefore had visited Johto on her own too. Then, after returning the machine part to the plant manager, we then make our way towards Lavender Town. Once in Lavender Town, we talk to this guy who manages to give us the EXPN card, so that way we're going to be able to wake up the Snorlax. I then head to Viridian City, where Snorlax is blocking the Diglett Cave, so I then battle the Snorlax, and I switch over to the Master Ball that Professor Elm so nicely gave to us. I don't actually need the Snorlax, but I do want the leftovers that the Snorlax is holding. Once through Diglett Cave, I can then arrive to Pewter City, where I can battle Brock. Long by are the days where he just had a Geodude and an Onix, as he now has a Graveler. And my moveset is not exactly prepared for rock ground types, as Return, Aeroblast, and Shadow Ball are all physical moves, and all of his Pokemon are typically very defensively heavy. But also, by this point in the game, we just have such a big level lead on his Pokemon that it's not really going to make much of a difference at all. And then we have Recover on top of it, so if we ever get in a bad situation like we currently see ourselves in, we can just get back out of it, because really, Brock doesn't have the moveset to be able to keep up with us. His Pokemon could have Rock Slide, but they just don't. It's not like Kabutops is going to be using Blizzard or Thunder on us. Then, working our way towards Celadon City, we managed to see these shinies during the mandatory battles. Shiny Victory Bell and Shiny Execute. Erika has certainly upgraded her team since the Kanto days, as her Tangela now actually has a pretty respectable moveset. Unfortunately, still not enough to keep up with Lugia. Somehow she managed to unevolve her Vileplume and re-evolve it into a Blossom, or more likely caught another Gloom, and then she visited Johto as well to catch this Jumpluff. Now what's a little surprising here is the Victory Bell. It's not very good at all, and it added Sunny Day. I head down south towards Janine and manage to fight these shinies along the way on Cycling Road. Shiny Butterfree and Shiny Charmeleon. Now in this game, Janine is the actual gym leader of Fuchsia City, since Koga has been upgraded to the Elite Four. But it turns out her dad played a sick joke on her. Apparently she must have been handed Pokemon that were supposed to be given to the gym trainers, as her Pokemon have not even reached level 40 yet, and therefore are just going to be a one-shot sweep from our nearly level 60 Lugia. I mean, she should have known that something was up when every single trainer that attempted the gym managed to win on their first try without any issues. On my way towards Cinnabar Island, I managed to fight a shiny octillery before then arriving to the city, or at least what's left of it, as Blue tells us the tale of how the city actually had a volcanic eruption and is no more. But if you head east, you can manage to find Blaine, who's hiding out in a cave and still accepting gym battles. Then clearly Blaine must have been fleeced out of his Arcanine because someone must have offered him a trade of Macargo for Arcanine, because that's the only way I could possibly see him making that trade. And then Magmar is not going to be any sort of issue as Return takes it down, and Rapidash finally learning a good move in Fire Blast is also no issue. With 7 of the 8 Kanto badges, we can find ourselves in Viridian City, where the gym is now unlocked and we're able to battle Blue. In Pokemon Red, Blue manages to have a team that is comprised a little bit differently based on which starter you have. For instance, if you choose Blastoise, he gets a Venusaur, and therefore the grass member of his team gets swapped out for Venusaur, which is Exeggutor. If you chose Venusaur, then the fire type of his team gets swapped out for Charizard, so therefore Arcanine is now Charizard. And lastly, if you chose Charizard, the water Pokemon of his team is then swapped out for Blastoise. Therefore, he doesn't have a Gyarados anymore and now has Blastoise. But because this version of Blue doesn't know which starter you chose, he just doesn't have a starter. And therefore, the last Pokemon that was going to be on his team is just going to be all of them. Therefore, making his team Pidgeot, Alakazam, Rhydon, Arcanine, Gyarados, and Exeggutor, which means that this rival is actually the same rival from Generation 1. His team doesn't change in any way, and his team is still just as balanced as it was before. And as you would expect, it does a pretty good job against our Lugia here. But unfortunately for him, Lugia of course has Recover, and that makes every battle easy, because anytime something bad happens, we can easily overcome. With Blue finally defeated, we can then head to Pallet Town and talk to Professor Oak in his own laboratory, who then tells us that we have all 8 badges and we can finally head towards Red, who's managing to hide himself in Mount Silver. The guard is finally gone, allowing us to make our way towards Mount Silver. Luckily, Mount Silver is not very long, and we can actually manage to get to Red in a pretty quick time. In these more difficult battles, I generally like to go in with a first attempt just to see how bad the battle is going to end up being. Even though Pikachu does have 4 moves, it typically only uses Charm or Thunder. In this case, it uses Thunder and misses, allowing me to get a victory, but unfortunately, because it was left on a sliver and he used a full restore not once, but twice, it takes a while before it goes down. I'm not really sure why Blastoise is next, but because it's got Blizzard, we really do have an issue here. Blizzard does massive damage, and because we actually ended up taking a little bit less than half, we can afford to do another attack here, which almost takes it down, but thanks to a Rain Dance, I'm now actually able to finish it off and move on to the Espeon. The Espeon actually isn't very much of a problem at all, we just don't want it to use a Reflect. Luckily, it uses a Psychic, which puts us in great shape for when he moves on to the Snorlax, which will most likely be the most difficult Pokemon to battle here. Luckily, our first Aeroblast manages to crit, therefore putting it at a very low amount of HP, and thanks to an Amnesia, our next Aeroblast is able to also crit and get us a very, very lucky attempt against Snorlax. From here, things should actually be pretty simple, as now all we have to do is face Charizard and Venusaur, which neither of them have super effective moves, so as long as we don't get hit by a rogue crit, we should be able to be just fine. And then for the Venusaur, we have a super effective Aeroblast, and it manages to one-shot the Venusaur, getting us the victory. Beating Red at 2:17 real time, 8:32 game time, at level 63, and with 12 resets. Being the first Pokemon to be finished in Gen 2, it means that it's going to be first on our leaderboard. Obviously being surpassed as I get much better at the game, and I'll get much better very quickly. It definitely helps that I was able to beat the game at a very low level without the use of my rare candies and a first try Red, so that will indeed help keep it at the front of the leaderboard for hopefully a little bit. Once again, big thanks to my 4 Patreon members. The next video should hopefully be Mew in Crystal, just like this one. If you like this kind of video, make sure to check out my collaboration video with Speedrunner0218 in the top right hand corner of the screen. We both play Slowbro, however he plays in Generation 3 and I play in Generation 1.